In this week's video, we're talking about the 3 stages of the whitetail rut: the pre-rut, peak rut, and post-rut.
Mossy Oak Properties, where outdoorsmen find their favorite place.
As deer hunters, when we hear whitetail rut, we rightfully get excited because it is the most exciting time of year as a deer hunter to be in the woods, to hunt North America's most popular big game animal. But when we break it down, whitetail rut, there are really, generally speaking, 3 phases. And in this video, we're going to talk about each of those 3 phases. Generally speaking, there's the pre-rut, peak rut, and post-rut. And we are going to talk about what whitetail deer, bucks, and does are doing in each of those stages of the rut.
Now, my favorite time to hunt the rut is a pre-rut.
Yeah. Pre-rut
and post-rut, but we'll get to the post-rut. Pre-rut, end of October, beginning of November, most of the Midwest and, Atlantic region, New England, just your southern states, you have the rut like from January 1st to January 1st, it seems like. But no, that is my favorite time of year. I mean, the deer are very, I wouldn't say vulnerable, the bucks are vulnerable, but it's your chances are increased.
Yeah, pre-rut is my favorite time of year to hunt as well, and they are a little bit more vulnerable. They're covering a little bit more ground, spending a little bit more time during the daylight, hanging out a little later in the morning, getting on their feet a little bit later in the afternoon. And for me, why I like to hunt the pre-rut is because bucks, they're not predictable or patternable, but their behavior is a little more intentional and less chaotic than it is, which we'll discuss during the peak of the rut. And they're still kind of on a bed to food pattern. Hunting scrapes this time of year or during the pre-rut is really effective, and bucks are really intentional in how they move, and they're not running around like a chicken with their head cut off during like they are during the pre-rut. So as you mentioned, they're very vulnerable, but they can be, their movements can be very intentional, and you can capitalize on that.
Yeah, especially if you practice quality deer management. You have, an adequate amount of does on the landscape, a nice healthy population, and when you have a lower population, those bucks, they have to compete, they have to be on their feet. And that's when all those calls and rattling and deer decoys and all this stuff tends to work a little bit better than not, because they are vocal, they are engaged in that pre-rut time period because of competition. You want to breed, you're going to have to compete, So yeah, pre-rut again is hands down, it's fun. And it's not so cold yet.
Exactly, it's a beautiful time of year. The leaves are usually peaking, and I like to hunt the pre-rut because you can really hunt sign that time of year. The bucks are leaving sign, and you can base a lot of your hunting strategy and your time in the stand around that time, especially scrapes. Research shows that most scraping activity is at night. I think northwards of 80%, but that doesn't mean that bucks aren't around that scrape. If there's a hot scrape and your trail camera shows a buck working a scrape often, it may be at night, even though you may have some daytime clips. The majority of that action is going to be at night, but that buck is in that area, and if you set up downwind of that scrape, he can scent check that scrape without actually having to visit it. So bucks come into scrapes. It's a great way to hang cameras and to check inventory of the deer on your property this time of year, but also hunting scrapes during the pre-rut. Bucks that's how they're communicating, bucks and does this time of year, chemically leaving information on those scrapes, and it's a great time of year to enjoy a lot of great deer behavior and activity during the pre-rut.
And then that transitions us into what they call like peak rut, or I like to say lockdown and just stay home. It's a time of year. As a professional deer manager, I can give you all the stats and stuff in your success, but as a just an average Joe deer hunter, you're sitting in a stand watching small deer, young deer, fawns that are by themselves because mama's, and daddy is doing their thing and stuff like that. Trying to be PG here, but yeah, it can be slow, but all of a sudden it could happen. So you got to be there. Unfortunately, just pack a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in the stand. So
yeah, peak rut. It's kind of an oxymoron because you hear the word peak rut and it sounds like it's when there's the most activity, but peak rut can also be, it's actually when bucks are locked down with does. It's usually the breeding phase when there's bucks are less active, covering less ground, and they're locked down with those, and you see less activity. So as you mentioned, it can be, for me, it's my least favorite time of year to hunt, and I actually spend less time in the woods. I let the property rest. I let bucks do their thing because they're going to be locked down with does for a couple of days, and you kind of read The sign, I mean, you go to some observation stands or drive around and kind of evaluate how deer are behaving. If you see a lot of fawns by themselves, that means, as you mentioned, mom and dad are in the bedroom creating next year's generation of white-tailed deer. But once you see more deer on their feet, you see fawns back with their does, with their moms, then bucks are going to be on their feet looking for does again. So peak rut, it sounds kind of backwards. It sounds like that's when you should be putting more time in. And again, you have to. If you're going to hunt the peak rut, you got to be prepared to put a lot of time in the stand. It's going to be a lot of deerless hours, but it could happen, at the snap of a finger. But it just sounds kind of backwards to say peak rut, but on the other side of the coin, it's when the action can be the most frustrating and the most slow.
Yeah, and those older class whitetails that we're all in search of, they only really breed 1 to maybe 3 does, a year. We would think it'd be a whole bunch more, but it's not like everybody happens all at the same time. So peak rut, they can come off, and that's when you have to be in the stand, because you don't know when that certain buck, and you have strangers come in all of a sudden that, a doe and estrus brought in. You just don't know. So, but it tends to be on the side of things. But but that goes into, I tell you what, I love hunting the post rut, that second rut.
Yeah, as I've gotten older, I like hunting October and December more than I like hunting November. And this is a blanket statement, but generally speaking, your pre-rut is kind of October, your peak rut is November, your post-rut is December, generally, relatively speaking. Post-rut is all about food, especially for bucks. They have lost up to 25% of their body weight during the rut looking for does, which is absurd to think about. If you're a 200-pound live weight buck at the end of the rut, you could have lost 50 pounds and weigh 150 pounds going into the most stressful time of year for you as a deer, while still there are does to be bred during the post-rut. So it's all about food during the post-rut. Does are going to be on food, bucks are going to be on food, trying to replenish the lost calories and resources that they extinguished during the rut. And there's going to be some late cycling does during the post-rut as well, so they're looking for food and they're looking for those last does coming into estrus.
Yeah, I mean, when they come off the first round of does and estrus, it's not like they go take a vacation.
Right.
That's not what they do. They're after the other. The next one up, and they'll be on their feet once again, almost like the pre-rut type thing. And again, that's where the food, those does have went through the same scenario, so they're going to hit the grocery store as well. So that's where you'll find bucks, hopefully. But pre-rut, post-rut, love it a lot.
They're really similar. I mean, the pre-rut and post-rut, biologically speaking, a lot of the behavior is the same. You'll see a lot of rubs and scrapes leading up and during the pre-rut. During peak rut, I mean, scrapes are dead. There's very little new sign in the woods. But during the post-rut, bucks will revisit scrapes. You'll see new scrapes. You'll see new rubs as bucks start to look and find those second waves of does. And it kind of speaks to the QDM philosophy again as to why you want to have an adequate number of deer on your property, because as we mentioned, post-rut is leading up into winter across most of the whitetails range, and it's the most stressful time of year for bucks, especially given the weight that they've lost. And like you said, as long as there's a doe in estrus, bucks are going to look to find her. And that's just how they're wired. They don't shut it down and say, oh, well, I'm tired. I'll let somebody else have her. If there's a doe in heat, bucks are going to look to find her. If you have, that's why we want as tight of a breeding window, as tight of a rut as possible. So we don't like, necessarily speaking, we don't like a late rut. Biologically speaking, it's a stressful time of year to have bucks run down in December and January, covering a lot of ground, looking for does when they should be on food sources, replenishing body weight and calories. Yeah, and that's one thing to almost summarize this, especially with the point, you want a tight rut. I mean, I know the fetus studies we mentioned in past videos, but that's why it's important. We're legal to where you can collect fetuses, so that way you can tell when your peak rut is, and that way you can, number one, your vacations, your time period, where you can spend the most worth of your time. So it's very important, especially when the fawn's being born, but that's another episode for later on. But having a rut that is condensed and very intense, it's a great experience. Absolutely, it's a great experience. Hunting wise, it improves your hunting, and as we've discussed in other videos, it's a tight rut, biologically speaking, is the best thing for the species. For sure. Well. So in this video we talked about pre-rut, which is our favorite time of year, peak rut, which is when you want to take a nap and not feel guilty about hunting, that's the time of year to do it. That's when bucks and does are creating next-gen whitetail. And then post-rut, when bucks are looking for food, looking for second round of does. It's cold out there, but it's also a really enjoyable time of year to hunt. But hopefully in this video, we've given you some information and thoughts that you can take into hunting the pre, peak, and post-rut.
Mossy Oak Properties, where outdoorsmen find their favorite place.